public the documents that the auto company was made to turn over to the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And it appears that GM CEO Mary Barra knew more than she's been saying. Rich Edson has been going through all these documents. Rich?
Well, Gerri, General Motors engineers knew about Chevy Cobalt's inadvertently shutting off about a decade before it recalled any of these cars, leading to the deaths of more than a dozen. That's what internal documents released by the House Energy and Commerce Committee show. In September of 2005, a GM engineer writes in an email that, quote, "I was very aware of an issue with inadvertent ignition offs. The piece cost of the ignition switch went up around 90 cents and would require $400,000 in tooling and almost $500,000 in volume." Though another GM document shows the company had already decided the cost was too high. In a report entitled, quote, "Cost Estimate to Change the Vehicle Key for the Cobalt Only," the author writes, quote, "None of the solutions represents an acceptable business case." In other words, the solution's too expensive. That very report says a lengthy lead time, cost, and no guarantee their proposed fix would fully solve the problem. And by last year, federal regulators were complaining of GM's cooperation, saying in an email to the company that, quote, "The general perception is that GM is too slow to communicate, slow to act, and at times requires additional effort of ODI government officials that we do not feel us necessary with some of your peers." Committee investigators also say GM CEO Mary Barra received an email in 2011 discussing steering problems in Cobalts, Ions, and other GM models. At the time, Barra was a senior vice president for global product development. GM hasn't gotten back to us, but they have tweeted something out about that particular claim. They say that that issue that Barra was aware of back in 2011 was completely separate from the ignition issue, the one that they were under intense scrutiny for. That tweet just going out a couple of minutes ago. Barra did testify on Capitol Hill that she had no prior knowledge of that ignition problem. The federal government gave GM $50 billion in a bailout for a loss of more than $10 billion. Gerri?
Rich, you know, we've been spending a lot of time looking at this 2011 tweet, the one that GM says is something different entirely than what we've been talking about with the GM recalls. It's surprising because the email itself resends a New York Times story, and it describes the recall that we're discussing. And then on top of it, there's an internal email from, you know, one of the workers there saying, "Oh, we took care of this." Now, we took a look at Mary Barra's comments in front of Congress, and she said she acted without hesitation. But it seems like it's at least possible at this point that she knew about this far in advance, as long ago as 2011.
Well, what the company is saying is it is an entirely separate issue, that this had to do with a steering function, I believe it was, and not that ignition problem that was the scrutiny, that there was so much scrutiny. Now, it's easy to possibly confuse the two, only because the steering column, of course, involves the ignition switch, where the problems with this, if you hit it with your knee, the car would shut off and the airbag wouldn't deploy. So right now, GM is denying that there is any link between the current CEO, Mary Barra, and what had happened. But this is a very long list of General Motors knowing about this issue, at least according to these documents, going all the way back to about a decade ago, taking that long to finally recall and fix this issue.
Rich, thanks for that. Appreciate your time. And with more on this story and what it means for GM is Lauren Fix, the car coach. Lauren, welcome back to the show. Great to have you here. I want to ask you specifically about this 2011 email received by Mary Barra. She's been very clear in her statements that this was not an issue she was familiar with, that she acted without hesitation. That was her testimony in front of Congress. We're looking at that email in question right now. Below what you see on the TV screen here is a New York Times story reprinted that describes the problems that we've been talking about with the ignition switch, with the steering. And now the company today, this afternoon, tweeting only moments ago that this is not the same issue, that it's something else entirely. What do you make of this scenario?
That is true. This is something else entirely. This is electric power steering, and they had quite a few recalls, 3,500 on GM vehicles and 846 complaints on Saturn. So NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, investigated into the actual steering rack. This is not the ignition switch, but there is an additional recall on the ignition switch for those people that are affected by the recall with the ignition key. They're now finding that when the key was in the on position, when the car was started, you could remove the key from the cylinder. Now, that is the part that is where you put the key in the ignition and turn it, not the part that actually steers the wheels. This email that you're looking at, the one where the gentleman who now works for American Axle sent to Mary Barra, is discussing the power steering rack, which is electric, and the failure rate that is on it, which is quite high, and there was a recall. So she may have been proactive on this, but because she was involved in safety, makes me wonder what other emails that are out there that gives you question about her statements in front of the Judiciary Committee. And I start to think to myself, you know, it certainly gives doubt, and it makes for a lot of concern for GM as a whole. And from my perspective, I think this is a big chunk of GM's problem, but we still keep going back to why was it swept under the rug? Why was this not released to consumers so that cars could be safer on the road? And that safety deafness is something that we're still going to have to peel through all these documents. I'm sure we'll be reading them all night tonight, trying to figure out more details.
Well, you know, this is the usual Friday dump, right? They do this so that journalists don't really look at this stuff, and maybe everybody forgets about it. I want you to hear, though, the GM CEO, Mary Barra's testimony in front of Congress just weeks ago. Here she is.
You mentioned in your testimony that this came to light on your watch. So I am assuming that there was no widespread knowledge in GM about this issue until you became CEO. Am I correct on that?
At the senior level of the company, we learned of this after the recall decision was made on January 31st. I was aware there in late December there was analysis going on a cobalt issue, but I had no more information than that.
So there you have it. She says that she didn't know about this until January 31st. But given the emails that we see on other kinds of recalls, it's a wonder that she didn't see recalls on or emails on this specific issue. Does it surprise you?
No, I think that she was taking advice from her counsel, which told her, you know, best thing to say is, I don't know, and we'll look into it, as you saw from the humor we saw from Saturday Night Live of that following few days. But the truth is, and the sad part of this is, it's very likely, and to me, because she was involved in safety, that when she took this position, she went through files to see what was going on and must have known about this somehow, some way, and maybe she thought it was fixed, but the problem is it still falls back on her watch when she was involved in safety. But she's not the only person. None of these decisions are made by one person. Just like on your show, if someone wants to make a change, multiple people are involved in it. So these are things that I think there's a lot more than meets the eye. We're just cracking the surface now.
Just cracking the surface. Lauren Fix, thanks for coming on tonight. Appreciate your hustle to get on the show tonight. Appreciate your time, and great reporting, of course, from our very own Rich Edson. Well, from safety to health care, the face of